5 African countries, Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, Tunisia, and Senegal, making global headlines due to mass protests. In Kenya, opposition leader Raila Odinga, who lost in the last general elections, led demonstrations today against what he deemed a deliberate increase in the cost of living caused by new taxes and an inability to control inflation. Many Kenyans have accused President William Ruto of emptying their pockets as the poor. Now, in Nigeria, the main opposition party candidates, Atiku Abubakar and Peter Obi, have led protests against the rising cost of living in the West African nation, whilst thousands of Tunisians rallied in the streets of the capital, Tunis, today, protesting President Kais Saied's perceived autocratic rule. Here to help us unpack the significance of these protests, we now speak to Dr. Charles Sinkala, President of the Organization for African Political Parties. Dr. Sinkala, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. Of course, protests in this rather tough economic environment has not really been just the confines of the African continent. I mean, even as we speak, Emmanuel Macron is facing his fair share of protests there because of his pension reforms. In the UK, we saw nurses, we saw truck drivers. We'll still be seeing many of those kind of protests because of the inflation that has hit that part of the world, and many other parts of the world, of course, have been seeing protests. But what is particularly significant and unique about these protests on the African continent?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me this evening, and good evening to your listeners and viewers. I think what needs to be appreciated is that it's been more than 60 years that the first African country, Sierra Leone, regained the independence of the African countries, and many others continued, as well as South Africa. There also regained the high independence in 1994. The question that a reasonable person will ask to review the past transition in terms of into democracy is, have we achieved what we wanted to achieve? Is it possible that now that the people of KwaZulu-Natal, now they are employed or they are having a fair deal in terms of the economic activities? Many people celebrate annually unto their independence that we claim that people are free. What are we free from? And these are the questions that the ordinary people are asking. And notwithstanding the fact that Africa now has grown to the tune of 1.3 billion people, with a population increase of about 3%, you know, more and more people are coming into the economic activities of our African continent and countries in particular. The question is, do we have a platform for everybody who are born into these platforms? Why is it that the population is so much larger than the population, the country's economic activities? These are the questions that many of the politicians that we have are failing to understand. And of course, we have external and internal matters that are affecting the world economies, especially when we are just coming from the COVID pandemic, the world recession, and many other factors. But if we talk about Africa in particular, Africa, we should not forget about the colonial project. We should not forget about the apartheid project. And how can we make sure that we are all awake? Yes, we attack our leaders and we shall continue doing these protests. But are we backing on the wrong door? That's a question that we have to answer to ourselves.
Yeah. Would you characterize, suppose, these protests as a sign of political instability, and therefore how would that political instability, for example, impact on growth and productivity in particular on the continent?
I wouldn't call it political instability. I think political instability is perfect. What the people are looking for, they want employment. They want to feed themselves. They do not want to be fed by social grants or any other subsidies by the government, as if the government is rearing chickens or pigs or any other animal which is domesticated. People, only what they need is they want to have a meaningful employment that can give them security for them to look after themselves, and they look after those people. They look into their family and help others as well. If you look at the unemployment rate, particularly in South Africa, it's over 43.5%. And that is a very large number in terms of having those people are not unemployed. That's why we see that there's high levels of crime, and there's now the agitators of citizen disobedience, like what we are likely seeing now. We're seeing these are the signs of now disobedience, from citizens, that we cannot no longer be controlled by the government because the government is not doing what they want. And this is significant if you look at those countries you've mentioned, Tunisia, Nigeria, as well as Kenya and South Africa, and many others which did not go to the historic protests for today. They are having similar challenges. The cost of living is too high. The cost of living is very high that people, they are not even affording to have one meal, notwithstanding the fact that they are not employed. And these are issues and factors that are not being addressed by the leaders. And I think when one person such as the leader for the EFF, Julius Malema, mentions that President Cyril Ramaphosa is not in control, one who starts to believe, to understand that if President Cyril Ramaphosa was in control of the economic activities of the country, you put the people of the nation as interest at first to solve this problem. But we see this disease is not only in South Africa, it is in Kenya, even though Raila Odinga is fighting the unprecedented elections, which has been disputed. But the problem is the same problems, which we have to look at how other solutions we can bring to the table to make sure that we look beyond government. We look to other external factors and influences that are making Africa to be where it is at the moment.
Yeah, let's talk about that. William Ruto just coming in. I mean, hardly in that position, a fairly new administration that is really still being challenged, as you put it, by Raila Odinga. But he seems to have upset the Kenyan people to a point where he's being accused of emptying the pockets of the poor. You're saying there are some parallels that we could look at there in what's happening in South Africa and other parts of the continent, in the sense that you're saying the problem is not the government itself, but is where power resides.
Of course, the problem is beyond the governments. We shall change governments all the time. We shall change politicians. We shall change members of parliament. We shall change councillors, even go to an extent of killing them. But the problem and the Africa problem continues to impact on the ordinary people. Yes, the disputed elections in Kenya, which subsequently to this election, earlier, President Uhuru Kenyatta considered that the elections were not okay. They had to go to rerun. Yes, Ruto has won the election, but it is also a devilish type of thought by other sectors in society that does not consider if one is in government. They all believe that it is only their clan or their tribe or their peace person who's supposed to be head of state and government for their nations. And they will always fight back as long as that person is in that office. It is only them who maybe God has bestowed to be a Messiah to save the people. But I would like to see a different perspective in terms of those who are in position of government and influence. They have to engage the public sector, the stakeholders in government, to sit down around the table and look at these issues and resolve them instead of creating a platform that is difficult. We shall see now. I'm not a Jewish prophet, or do I pretend to be one, that these states in Africa, in future, they will be ungovernable. As now people, we are seeing them, they are rising against the government and that they bestowed into power. But we hope and pray that we shall not go to that extent of civil disobedience. We hope that these protests as well, they are done in an amicably way. I'm very happy that across Africa, even though some of the people were arrested in South Africa and a few minor incidents there, these protests were peaceful. And I hope that they shall yield reasonable results that should be achieved for people to start working in offices and look beyond the governments.
Yeah. Let's look at Nigeria. I mean, one of the leading economies on the African continent. Do you think there is a possibility of change in Nigeria? I mean, President Muhammadu Buhari's party still remains in power with the Bola Tinubu coming in. There are many who believe that much of the same will continue to happen in that economy.
Well, there's not much, that I anticipate that to happen in the near future, unless industrialization and the cabin of unemployment rate, which is about 3.2%, 3.3% of the 215 million people, is addressed. Imagine such a population of population of unemployment. We are talking about 60 million people. They are not employed. Notwithstanding the fact that there are also other Nigerians who have left, who are living outside the country, who are living in South Africa, who are living here in Zambia, who are living in many other parts of the world. This is a serious time bomb that governance becomes a problem. What has to be addressed is the population, yes. In fact, I was speaking to one person before I could come to this platform, that we need to start now instituting birth and population control to make sure that our economies grow enough to come and hold a large number of population to give them activities and opportunities. I may sound like Bill Gates that of their project of depopulation, but China has implemented this population control, and that's why you see China's economy has evolved to industrialize and give an opportunity to many of the Chinese, where they restricted the family to have 2 children until the economical activities or industrialization of the nation grows to come and support the population growth. Yeah.
Do you think our leaders are thinking in that line? I mean, our ability to control our population growth, I suppose, lies in what would be the policies of those various countries.
I think they are not at that stage. I don't see any head of state who's thinking, the way as an organization for African political parties are thinking. But, we have affiliation for all of these political parties in Africa. And we've written letters to heads of states and government, including those who are in opposition, that how can we control our population, to make sure that we grow first our economic activities, industrialize Africa, refuse from exporting raw materials, which I've spoken most of the time against, that we're supposed to create industrialization within African activities so that we do not create employment elsewhere in Russia or United States of America or China for that matter. I think, there are some leaders who have started talking. We can see that the president of Tanzania visited recently, President Cyril Ramaphosa, but would like to see them converge within the African continent to discuss these issues. They must not only rise up by an occasion of President Joe Biden to go to the United States of America just to discuss on how democracy can be improved in terms of African set. We would like to see conferences happening frequently in Africa, by African leaders and the stakeholders to sit down and say, how can we reduce this unemployment rate to afford and accord a lot of young men and women who are born every day in our continent to address these issues. But I see that we are consumed in differences. We are consumed in passing a vote of no confidence in that person who is in the office. We are consumed in matters of taking things to the street. It is unprecedented after the history of our democracy, of regaining our independence, that we can now still continue to pickpocket and picketing in the streets instead of resolving these issues. Yes, they talk about it was peaceful protest. I've never seen any protest which is peaceful. By virtue of people protesting, it means that there's a problem.
With our inability, as it seems, to stymie the increase in the cost of living, are we largely to see an escalation, an increase of such protests?
Yes, it will. It will. You must remember that the external matters that I've talked about, Africa has got literally no control about. Africa does not farm oil. Africa does not produce oil. If you talk about South Africa, Zambia, and these southern part of the region, even though Nigeria claims that it produces oil, it does not produce that oil for its consumption. I was recently in Nigeria, and the cost of fuel there, it is unbelievable. The load shedding there, it is as worse as it is in South Africa. It is as worse as it is elsewhere. You see when you are passing through the city, the towns, the markets, you hear only generators making noise there. It is the problem of not being in control, because most of these factors, they're external factors. The external factors such as the war in the Ukraine, external factors of the world recession, and many others imposed problems by the African leaders themselves. But the question is, yes, we have got those external factors which we literally have got no control about. The rise in devaluation of our currency against the greenback, the dollar, is also as an exposure to something. How can we come into terms as an African continent, combine our $8.4 trillion GDP combined, and deal with the West, deal with the United States of America first one? How can we trade fairly? I cannot give you 20 rand and you only give me $1. These are the difficult questions that we have to reclaim our position in Africa, not only to celebrate our political independence, but also would like to own our economical independence.
Dr. Charles Sinkala, much appreciated as always. Thanks so much for coming on tonight. Dr. Charles Sinkala, he is the president from the Organization for African Political Parties.